Welcome to the Vision for Life podcast, an ongoing conversation between the pastors of Fellowship Denver and the church at large. Each week, we talk about life, faith, the Bible, and how to follow Jesus as we go about our daily lives. I'm Autumn, the host of the podcast. Hunter is joining me today. Hunter, glad you're here.
Autumn, thanks for having me back.
Every time. I will always have you back. Thus far. I suppose there could be a line that you could potentially cross that would get you uninvited.
I will probably find the line.
That would get you uninvited from being a recurring guest on the Vision for Life podcast. But so far, I keep inviting you back.
And it's not wardrobe commentary. That's not the line. I'll keep pressing the envelope.
You know, as we've gotten a few more responses to our survey about wardrobe updates, and it's still, even with a few more rolling in, pretty evenly split. Some people enjoy them, others don't.
I think what we've done is given half our podcast listeners an opportunity to tell us to knock it off. So I've heard that.
All right. Well, today, sans wardrobe update, we are going to be discussing a question that was sent in by one of our listeners. The format in which I received it, actually, via email. I regularly invite our listeners to send things in to podcast@fellowshipdenver.org. Some of our listeners take me up on that. And so it's not actually phrased as a question, but I understand the intent
it's an issue they would like to hear commentary on, discussion, conversation. We're not pundits, but we do try to have thoughtful conversation.
Yes. So this suggestion was sent to us actually while you were on sabbatical. So a few months ago, while you were out on sabbatical, our listener sent in this.
And I think it came with a commentary. Maybe this would be a good topic after Hunter is back from sabbatical. And I think when they hear what it is, they'll understand if they know me. I'll explain why they would need me in this conversation.
Oh, well, I think the person who submitted it inserted a little bit of explanation. But, we'll read this and then you can offer up your own explanation.
Well, explanation for why they needed me in the conversation.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I have some expertise on this topic.
All right. Now that we've dragged out this introduction far too long, how about I read what our listener was suggesting we discuss? Here's how it's stated. In the suburbs, youth sports is it. I thought the topic of youth sports, would be a great one to conquer when Hunter. Wow, high hopes. Yeah. Okay, bravo to whoever sent this in. I don't know that we're going to conquer it, but we will discuss it.
A Q&C episode.
When Hunter gets back, since everyone on staff at Fellowship loves team sports, LOL. At least those who preach. Some of our preachers might take issue with that, but many also do reference sports. The listener goes on, when I was 20 and dreamed about my faith life, missing church for baseball tournaments was not in my dreams. Battling schedules to get to fellowship group or Bible study was not what I thought was on the agenda. And then the listener also sent in an article that was posted, well, it was a podcast initially, posted with a transcript on the Gospel Coalition that addressed the topic of youth sports. So our listener is saying this is their reality, the reality in the listener's life at the moment, navigating the world of youth sports. And could we discuss and potentially offer some perspective or biblical wisdom on this topic?
And I thought they wanted my perspective because of my athletic ability. So
naturally,
yeah,
yes.
I've obviously wrestled with how do I integrate my highly competitive and highly skilled athletic ability into my overall life with Christ. And so it's a problem I've had to really wrestle with my whole life.
That's probably it. That's probably why the listener
My parents, boy, they wrestle with, Hunter is such a gifted athlete, but there's other things we want him to do as well.
There are other things that are important in life.
That's right. We also really hope he gets an accounting degree.
All right. Well, that's one way to read it, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The other way would be exactly what the listener said, which is that maybe sometimes from time to time you reference sports in your sermons. I do love team
sports. I grew up in a family that loved watching sports. And I have a sister-in-law who did not come from a sports watching family. She came from a music family. They're all very musical. It's really incredible what her family's into. And I remember like her first Christmas with us. We're all sitting around in the living room and there's a football game on and no one is really like watching the game closely. It's just a random bowl game like Oklahoma State, versus Wake Forest or something like that. And so we're all sitting there, we're reading, we're doing other things, the game's on. And she looks up and she goes, "Now, why are we watching this game?" and we all looked up and we said, "Because it's on." Like it never crossed our mind that there would be a game being broadcast on television and you wouldn't have it up on the TV. Yeah. I mean, that just didn't even cross our mind. So it was something that we all looked at each other, this moment of realization, like, I guess that's not what everyone does.
So we've established your personal and familial involvement in the great shared exercise in our country of watching team sports.
Yeah, and I should point out, my mom is the chief agitator of this. She's the one that loves the sports.
To it.
Yes, she's the most committed.
Did you play youth sports? Just out of curiosity,
did
you play youth sports?
I played baseball growing up, and I think this would actually inform some of what we're going to talk about. I hit a point where my ability to play the game could not keep up with the competition. So painful reality that came fairly early in my career. So I had to face down that no matter how much I love this, I'm just not good enough.
I played a variety of youth sports. I grew up in a small town. And everyone we did it as a pastime. And then because the school was small, many people had an opportunity to try out for the team and make a team. So I played t-ball and softball just in rec leagues in the town. And then in school, I played volleyball and soccer throughout junior high and high school, and then didn't play after high school. But mostly I participated in rec league softball, and then through my school, participated in soccer and volleyball. And that was the extent of my personal participation.
I had a phase too as a teenager where I could really shoot the basketball. Like I was a really good shot, but I needed to be very, 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 very open. and so basketball didn't go far.
So what we're discussing today we're familiar with the world of youth sports. The way in which I think many of our families, some of our kids who participate, experience the world of youth sports is very different now from my own experience growing up. So what our listener is asking is, how do I navigate this? And it sounds like from a personal standpoint, from the standpoint of my children participate in youth sports, and it's creating a reality in our lives in which sports is competing for time as a family and competing for the specific mention is it's making it difficult to get to fellowship group or to Bible study. So I think that's one question in what our listener is asking here.
And I talk to people who have kids whose sports leagues have Sunday games, and they're wanting to be involved in church. They're wanting to be regular worshipers on Sunday morning. They're also, when their kids get into middle school, they want them to be involved in student ministry. And our student ministry meets on Sunday afternoon and evening. And so I find parents also wrestling with, this is taking up some space that I want devoted to church. I've also talked to parents who have said, this takes up weekend time period, Friday, Saturday, sometimes some weeknights. And there's a sense in which it's causing family life to have to be reorganized, like it's taking away from just the other things we want to do together as a family. So I think that's probably the reason this question is pertinent. It's not just that, hey, what do we think about sports, but particularly how do you navigate the reality, which, as you pointed out, is perhaps even more of an issue for parents today than it was when I was growing up. How do you navigate the reality that youth sports, particularly the outside of school leagues like the clubs, the youth sports clubs and the leagues, how do you navigate the fact that they are asking for time that we as a family may want to do other things with, such as family time or church? How do you navigate the increasing cost? They're expensive, and I think that's something you have to wrestle with. And as you and I were kind of chopping this up, we said this is a classic wisdom problem.
Yeah. Yeah, we've mentioned on the podcast before that wisdom applies general principles about how God made the world to work. So wisdom asks, how did God order the world? How did God make the world to work? And then applies those principles to a specific situation. And so I agree, Hunter. I think that the question of youth sports and the question that our listeners wrestling with, and I know many of our families do also, is a wisdom issue.
Yeah, and one of the creation order principles is God made the family to be the very first political and social unit. And so it's right. If you have children and you want to cultivate a life as a family, it's right to be asking what that looks like. And then another creation order principle is God made us to flourish as worshipers of His, and it is good and it's right to set aside protected time to worship Him and to be in His presence and to be gathered with His people and to be part of the gathering the body of Christ. So both of those things are important. Biblically minded Christians will take both of those seriously, the family and worship. They will take both those seriously. And I think that's where a lot of this comes from. Mm-hmm. And so you have to figure out how can you not compromise what you know to be good and right on the priority of worship and family while still participating in sports.
I think it's such a good example of a wisdom issue also because of the recognition of the role of the family, the role of the church, the important God-given role of both the family and the church. But then also in this particular conversation, it's looking at something, youth sports, in which we can easily see the benefit. So there are many readily apparent benefits of participating in athletics, in sports. I mean, what comes to my mind is and what I've talked to parents about too, is that sports can instill discipline in their kids. Through team sports, kids can learn how to work with others, how to respond instead of reacting, how to cheer on teammates. So how to gain those skills and qualities. It's good exercise. It provides good physical activity. Yeah. And in the transcript of the podcast we listened to, there was a section in which one of the men being interviewed pointed out that sports provide a great test of character. They put you in situations in which you're under pressure and they reveal the content of your character. And he was saying that's something he had appreciated about sports when he watched his children participate in them. So we have this issue set alongside these principles of the God-given role of family and the family of God, and then youth sports, that parents can look at it and say, but there are so many good things to be gained through it.
That's right. And I would even add all the good things that you named. You don't even have to be especially talented or good at the sport in order to benefit from. So I was never talented or good at baseball, but I loved it. I absolutely loved playing. I loved the camaraderie of the team. I got to watch my skills develop, even though they had a ceiling. I got to watch them develop, and there was real reward in that. And one of the lifelong lessons that I took from that experience was you can really enjoy things that you're not great at, that you're just okay at, like things that you don't come naturally to you or that you're never going to be the best in. You can still get a lot of enjoyment out of them. And I've taken that lesson and applied it to many things that I'm not great at and I still enjoy. So that was one of the lessons of sports. I'm imagining that folks who have kids in music, I was also in music growing up, that's true in that space as well. And then you can gain lifelong interest from it. I still love watching baseball, and I probably would not love watching baseball nearly as much if I didn't understand the game because I had played it.
Mm-hmm. And I think in addition to what you just mentioned, that you gain a greater understanding often of whatever sport you played. you mentioned music. It works that way with music too. If you participated in music, then when you listened to it, if you took music lessons and learned something about musical technique and were able to apply that and had the reward of doing something that you applied yourself to, seeing how you could grow in skill, even if there's a limit to it, and experience the reward of hard work, of applying yourself to something, then I think as an adult, one of the dividends that pays is that you're connected then. It's an easy way to connect to other people
Right.
who have an appreciation of the same thing. So there's so many good things about it. And so it provides a great case study for how do we apply wisdom to this particular issue. And what we wanted to do was to say, well, a good way to think through this issue and other similar issues is to ask, what story am I telling myself? So what story am I telling myself in this case about youth sports? To make it very specific to our listeners' question, what story am I telling myself about why my son should or should not participate in baseball?
That's right. And one of the questions that's always good to ask yourself when you're trying to discern what should I do in this situation or that situation, it's a wisdom issue, is not only to ask how did God make creation to work, which we name some of those things, but also what stories am I telling myself about this thing, and be curious about what those stories are and be willing to ask, are those stories accurate? Am I seeing that accurately? And I often hear Christians say, well, be careful that sports doesn't become an idol. You're not being idolatrous. That's great advice. But how do you do that? Right? That's how do you know? How do you know?
Yeah.
And often our Christian advice kind of is like, we just put a little Christian saying like, be careful, this is not an idol over it. And then we don't know how to flesh it out from there. So I think this process of examining some of the stories we might be telling ourselves is how you test that a little bit. And when we were talking about this before we started recording, we just named a few narratives that people tend to tell themselves about the benefit and the value of sports. It may be something that would convince them to why we've got to make this the biggest rock, in the bucket. And I think it's good to be aware of what those are and to ask, is that really accurate? Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk through those, through the narratives that we identified. There are probably more. So as you're listening to this, I'm sure our listeners can add your own stories you've told yourself, narratives you've heard. But we thought through a few that are common ones that we have heard as we've discussed this issue with parents here at Fellowship.
Yeah. The first one we identified was there can tend to be a story that nurture can always overcome nature. And what we're getting at there is sports are an excellent example of the interplay of these two things, because there's natural athletic ability. And if your parents were both athletic and they have you, there's a lot better chance that you're going to be athletic than if your parents are short and slow. So there's a natural ability that comes as a result of having good athletic genes. And there is the reality that those skills have to be developed. Good coaching can teach you how to both think and how to play physically the game in a way that not having coaching wouldn't help you do. And so sports are an achievement in sports is a combination of both nature, athletic ability, and nurture, coaching and practice and development. But I think the story we tend to believe, especially that the sports leagues the youth sports leagues want to kind of sell to parents or market to parents, is really it's about the nurture side of things. They want to tell them, like, with the right coaching and with enough practice and enough repetition, and if you'll just invest in this as a parent, your kid can go a lot further than they'll be able to if they just rely on natural athletic ability plus whatever kind of coaching they can get through their school.
What is the danger in believing that narrative? So, I mean, there is some reality to the fact that if you apply yourself, if you practice, as you said, Hunter, if you sit under good coaching, that you will gain some skill that's normative, the way of things. You and I even said with our limited experience and ability, we experienced that to be true. But what could be dangerous about actually buying into this narrative?
I think the unforeseen side, or maybe the part that's not acknowledged, is there are a lot of people who have a lot of coaching and a lot of development. They've got really the best coaches you can get at your stage of life, or they've got really good coaching and plenty of opportunities to play, and they hit a ceiling in that sport, and they can't go any further. And that ceiling usually comes down to they're just don't quite have the ability, the natural ability, to go any further. I have several friends whose children are playing collegiate sports now, and I've watched them have to navigate this, because if you play collegiate sports, that means you did well at high school, and they invested a lot in the coaching of their sons. It's all sons in this case, in the coaching of their sons, really from early teenage years on. They invest a ton in the coaching of their sons and in the development. But they've hit a point in their college playing career where it's probably unlikely that they'll go too much beyond that. They're just starting to run into competition that's really stiff and really tough, and so they're having to come to terms with that. I think that reality hits a lot of people sooner than college, and there is a limit to how much you can just develop if you don't have natural ability. So it's just something to be aware of. That it is a temptation, I think, to justify more and more time and more expense under the banner of, well, if we just invest a little bit more in development, they can always go further.
Mm-hmm. Attached to the narrative that you said, particularly like clubs or leagues might construct around this, is like your child does have potential, and you're saying be aware. For many of us, there's just a limit to our intrinsic potential, that it's still good to be under good coaching and to practice. But to put our sort of expectation in that would be misplaced. And when parents do that, I think their children get pulled into that. Then either the child is expected to adopt that same expectation and that same mindset, or the parent can become at some point the one driving it, and the child can feel the undue pressure that places
that's a great point
on them.
Parents, the more realistic parents can be about where their kids are in their development and what their potential is, and the better they can help their kids to navigate the decisions and the choices that will have to come. And those choices will be different things for different people. We have a family in our church whose son has played competitively up in a sport up through high school. And I remember talking to them last year when the season was coming to an end, and they said, we're kind of coming to terms with the fact that this is probably as far as he's going to go. And I thought that was really good realism on their part, really good perspective. It wasn't unrealistic. They had certainly helped him grow and develop. But I think they're also facing reality and helping him face that reality. And that's not just for really good athletes. Like, again, I'm not a very good one. And I can remember how much I needed my dad to help me come to terms with the fact that I had hit my baseball limit when I was 15 years old. I think it was 15 years old. I needed Dad to help me think about what it would mean to not be a baseball player for the rest of my my years, and that was a hard thing because I loved it.
In the story that you just offered up about yourself, but also in talking about your friends who you're watching as they are helping their children navigate collegiate sports, and coming to terms with the fact that this is probably where their advancement as an athlete will very likely stop, that they have topped out in where that they can't go further or get a better position or more playing time, that this is now kind of the reality that they've run into. There is a way in which I think parents can guard against that as they start to, if their children move through youth sports. So if the narrative that nurture can overcome nature is bought into, I think parents or coaches could unwittingly make this idea a central plank of someone's identity formation, of a child's identity formation, which could be really hard to come to terms with later when they hit that ceiling.
That's right. That's right.
Another of the narratives that we have heard, I think that are common in the world of youth sports, is that parents feel like if they don't go all in, and by that, usually the way that manifests is being involved in club level sports or in some more highly competitive,
a travel squad or something like that.
Exactly. Sort of sports team, that their student will fall behind, will be behind their peers. So this might look like other kids in your neighborhood are doing this. It might manifest as if you don't get your child on a highly competitive team, then when they get to the high school that they want to go to, they won't be able to play their sport of choice because they will be behind. But most of those travel teams or club sports do require weekend participation. And so then again, parents are having to grapple with, well, if I don't allow my child to participate in this tournament or to play in games on Sundays, to miss church events, then they're going to, either coaches will look at them differently or they won't get as much playing time. They will somehow be left out or won't be as developed as the other players who are there and are getting this playing time.
Yeah, I think that's a extension of the nurture always trumps nature debate, because the flip side of this is those who are really naturally good at a sport and have the ability to keep going and going, that usually stands out, regardless if they play in the extra club league or whatnot. It usually comes to the surface. So I think in pointing this out, I'm just encouraging parents to be a little bit more selective in picking their spots. There's not a right or wrong answer or a one size fits all answer in terms of, well, you should only play school sports, not club sports, or you should only play club sports that have a definite season rather than the year round club sports. I mean, there's not a hard and fast rule that I can give people here, but I would say pick your spots and don't think you have to pick every spot or take advantage of every option that's being offered in order for your kid to really enjoy and do well in a sport. In fact, in the podcast, there was a athlete who I know because he's played for the Atlanta Braves, and I'm a fan. So he mentioned that growing up, he played a lot of sports. Even though he ended up being a great baseball player, he played different sports in different seasons. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Mm-hmm. He's a good athlete, obviously, but I think there's a lot of wisdom in playing different sports rather than just putting all your eggs in one basket. And some of the club leagues now can allow you to almost play year round or play for 9 months out of 12 in one sport. And I'm not sure that always benefits kids in a way that taking a break or playing something different or just having an off season would benefit them. So choose your spots.
Yeah. I think I would say to parents also to this, if you're hearing this narrative or if this is a thought you've had about your child potentially not getting as much playing time, not being as recognized, maybe being on the outs with coaches, if you choose to prioritize something else. So namely, in this instance, church or church events, participation in student fellowship, youth group, over a certain game or a game that might take place at the same time. I think, again, Hunter, I would reiterate what you said about there is not a one-size-fits-all answer to either choosing what sort of team your child plays in or whether or not what is a good amount for your family to set these sort of parameters around as far as what you will miss or won't miss. But I do think there's a way to examine your own motivations in it. And to ask, what is your goal or your hope for your child through their participation in this team? is your hope. Sometimes the reality is that you as a parent want to be perceived a certain way. So that might be a motivation in this. Sometimes your worry might be that your child will be perceived a certain way if they aren't able to participate on a Sunday morning. And it's a burden you feel that you don't want to place on them. Is your hope for your child to be one of the best or have the most playing time? Or is your hope that your child will gain some discipline and will have fun? We'll have fun playing this game that was initially intended to just be fun and to be a way that we can move our bodies, work together, play alongside other people. So I think there's room here for parents to examine their own motivations when they're faced with one of these decisions.
That's good advice.
All right, what's another of the narratives that we may hear?
Well, the listener alluded to it. In the suburbs, youth sports is it. It's the thing everybody does. And there's real social benefits to being involved in sports. I can remember last spring going with my brother to my nephew's baseball game, and it's a parent social scene out there at the baseball game. So I think there's social benefits and there's a desire to have friends and to be part of the community and part of what's going on in our part of town. And so I think that's another thing people have to wrestle with is, well, if we don't do this, we're going to miss out on a lot of social opportunities. I would say I don't think that's a particularly a unique problem to youth sports in the sense that to be a Christian in a predominantly non-Christian culture like the one we live in, it means you're going to have some social priorities for gathering with the body of Christ. Our listener mentioned fellowship groups. You're going to have some social priorities that the rest of your friends and your neighbors aren't really thinking about. And so in some ways, this is just a subset of that larger problem of you're going to have to invest some space and some time and energy into the body of Christ. And I can't tell everyone exactly how much energy you should invest in the body of Christ, but I do think you should make corporate worship a major priority of your family's life, a big rock of your family's life. I think gathering in some kind of smaller community with other believers regularly should be a major priority of your family's life. And part of this you have to ask is, like, what's the long game that I want my kids to learn? What do I want my kids to pick up from watching my life and the rhythms of our family life for the long haul? I grew up going to churches that in hindsight weren't awesome. They didn't really teach a lot of biblical Christianity. The liturgy was good, and so the liturgy was solid. We said the Apostles' Creed, we sang the good songs, we prayed the Lord's Prayer. But what I learned from doing that week in, week out, it was boring. I sat there and wanted to eat mints out of my mom's purse, and phones weren't around back then, but they had been. I'd have been on that thing. And the sermons were short, but they were so bad they felt like they took eternity. Anyway, I'm off in left field now. But what I'm trying to say is, I learned the value. This is an important thing to do, to have this space every week. And so, as an adult, when I got more serious about my faith, it wasn't like a totally out of left field concept that I would have some reserved time on Sunday to worship and to be with the body of Christ. I didn't. And that was so even from my less than ideal church experience growing up, that was a real gift that I got. And if you had asked my parents in the moment, does Hunter like going to church? They would have been like, no, he does not like going to church. And is there payoff? They'd have been like, we don't see it.
To be determined.
Doesn't look like there's any payoff here. and yet, playing the long game, there was a lot of payoff, right? And so I want to always encourage us to play the long game.
You alluded to this, Hunter, but this, you said, is really a subset of, we could apply this question like we'll be left out socially, or my children will feel some sort of social pressure because of this choice we're making. This actually does pop up in so many various ways. I think one other way that I have talked to parents about this same concern is in the use of digital media, which the whole conversation, the national narrative around kids using individual devices is shifting now. But for many, many years, the assumption was that when your child hit about 11, definitely 12, they would have a smartphone or a tablet or both. And then now Apple Watches or some sort of smartwatch are also very common, just normative among middle schoolers and high schoolers. And the concern, many Christian parents were very concerned about their children having access to the internet, even if safeguards were put in place, and to social media, but definitely felt the social pressure of, if my child doesn't have this device and can't stay connected to their peers, then they'll be left out socially. So that's one other issue in which this kind of exact refrain fits very neatly. And one way that I have seen parents here at Fellowship talking about this, and a way to approach this that I have found to be very powerful, is to maintain strong church commitment to attending on Sundays, to being part of a smaller community within the body of Christ, what we call fellowship groups. So some sort of small group, a body of believers who you're meeting with regularly, and other parents who you have a connection with, and making these commitments at a familial level, but then also at a community level. So if I saw some parents here start talking about this when their children were young, talking about, well, we probably are going to delay giving our kids a cell phone or delay them having some sort of individual device. But we also have other friends at Fellowship who we're talking to about this issue and saying, would you be willing to do that? So when your child gets to 13, 14, would you with us be willing to say, actually, the age at which we've determined you're going to get an individual device is 15. But you also have friends in this family and this family and this family who are doing the same. We're all doing it together, and we're choosing to parent differently in this area of life together. And then it makes children, even if they might know that this is a different choice than some of their peers, parents are making, they also have friends who are in that situation with them. I think the same can apply to this area of youth sports, that for some of our families, they'll decide differently. This is a wisdom issue, which is why we're not saying there is one right way to navigate this. But I do think it's powerful if certain families are going to say, well, if this conflicts with our participation on Sunday mornings or perhaps in a fellowship group or student fellowship, then are there other families at Fellowship doing the same? And then we actually can have that conversation with our children and point to other families who are doing this with us. It's really powerful to make those commitments in community.
It's great advice. And Christians working together on this, as opposed to kind of seeing themselves as having to ruggedly go it alone, is a great approach. So I'm glad you have seen that, and thanks for unpacking that a little bit.
All right. What might be another of the narratives that parents hear or might be tempted to believe?
I think another one is my kid has to become a specialist in this sport. And I alluded to this already, so maybe don't need to belabor it. But the cultivation of all of these outside of school leagues and the level of increasing competition they offer, usually that comes with a significant level of financial buy-in from the families and stuff. I think all of that lends you toward a specialist mindset, which is, hey, if we're going to invest this much money in this, we better make this one of our main things. Like, our heart and our priorities tend to go where our money goes. And so I can't remember years ago when I bought a nice bike, I was like, I better really be committed now to biking. I'm I'm not just buying a bike, I'm making a commitment to biking as one of my main recreational activities. And so if you just take that with sports, it's like, well, if we choose basketball, then it better be basketball is going to be our main thing. Mm-hmm. For very elite athletes in a particular sport, that can make some sense, especially when they get to the teenage years. I think that can make some sense because often to play against the elite competition and to develop in the elite competition, you've got to really commit to that being the main sport you play. But for all the rest who aren't very obviously elite in their sport, I think a more general approach is probably a better approach. In general, the teenage years and earlier don't tend to be times when most of us are finding our specialty. They tend to be more times of exploration where we're trying different things, we're exploring, we're learning different things, and we're even there's even overlap in learning different things. So that's, I think, a general approach with the caveat of sometimes you have someone who's so talented in something, it not only sports, it could be music, it could be theater, and they're so obviously talented, or there's so much passion for that it's going to take up a big chunk of time for them. I think that's understandable.
To this narrative specifically, my child has to be a specialist. There's so much bound up in that. Some parents are hoping that their child will be able to go further. So to get some sort of scholarship, college scholarship, or that their child will experience a certain level, you use the word elite, but will rise to a certain level within that sport. And my caution in this one is to just cautious about what you're putting your hope in and to ask if one of these other, again, I had said it before, this is another way of saying examine your motivations, but be cautious of what you're putting your hope in and of what you're encouraging your children to put their hope in.
I think that's great advice. And then the last one we had was just that my kid really likes it. My kid loves this, right? So
Yes.
What advice do you give to parents who are just like, this is what my kid loves to do?
Well, I think overall, the way we are culturally conditioned in Denver, but as Americans too, is, and you said it earlier, Hunter, in a great way. Maybe I'll pitch this to you in a moment, but you said because of the influence of individualism, we tend to, as parents, allow our children to make a lot of decisions, or we want to allow them to express themselves and to make a lot of decisions for themselves. So we give them a pretty big, often, I think, the mode of parenting, of modern American parenting, and particularly in a progressive city, is to give our children a lot of bandwidth once they get to an age where they start to express interest in some things or desire around some things. I see parents struggling with this in faith formation in their children. They want their kids to want to come to church. And so if their child doesn't really express an enjoyment of church or isn't eager to come to student fellowship to participate in youth ministry, then parents wrestle with, well, should I make them come or should I tell them that they need to come? And so here, I think our cultural conditioning that we need to be aware of this tendency in the way that we parent. It is good to encourage your child's interest in something good. So if your child has expressed an interest in playing sports, whatever sport that might be, I am not saying discourage that. So many good things can be gained through participation in youth sports. I would say, along with that, be willing to parent. So you are the one who sets the priorities for your family. And this is not, I am not encouraging authoritarian parenting, but there's still a way in which God has given you the care and keeping and cultivation of your home. And because parents are tasked with that, with the cultivation of their children, and the primary way that Scripture tells us to cultivate our children is to know God and to walk in His ways. Those are the repeated commands given to parents, and then to discipline lovingly after the pattern of God, our good Father. And so you as the parent, in setting the tone for your home, you get to decide what your children's priorities are or should be, especially when it comes to their growth, their development, and their faith formation. So my encouragement to parents here is that be willing to engage in potentially difficult conversations with your children to help them put sports in the right place.
Yeah. You mentioned you're not advocating for authoritarian parenting, But I think you are advocating for what I might call authoritative parenting, which is, as a parent, own the fact that God has given you authority and he's given you wisdom, and you need to steward that and exercise it for your child's good. I totally share I don't want to advocate for authoritarian parenting, but I don't know many people who I think are prone to that. I can't think of anyone that I've run across in the modern world we live in that I think is really prone to being overly strict and authoritarian in their parenting style. I think it's more common that we would say, well, we really have to give the children room to choose and express. I say that as someone who I was raised, and I was raised by parents who gave me a lot of room to make decisions. And in fact, I did not have a curfew. And so I did not have a curfew. I was told to figure out what time I should come home. And I was told that I had to walk into my parents' bedroom and wake them up and let them know when I was home. That was the rule. So in my house, now all my friends' parents gave them curfews. So that meant, if I wanted to stay out past about midnight, I was alone. But let me tell you, Subway was still open at midnight. So I would hit it every night after all my friends went home. And that was a benefit I had from having non-authoritarian parents. It's like, I get to go to Subway after you suckers have to go home. The job of parents, though, is to hold up reality to their children and to be the voice of reality. If you had asked me, is your dad authoritarian growing up, I'd have been like, oh my gosh, he's so authoritarian. That man is a dictator, even though I didn't have a curfew, and I had a generous allowance. I didn't have a curfew. I would have told you my dad was a dictator. Well, the truth was my dad was just a reality mirror, and he just regularly confronted my youthful foolishness in a way that just let me know there was another way to think about things and see things.
To this issue specifically, depending on the age of your child, especially as they get older, I think it is wise to make it a discussion with them, but you're guiding them. You're guiding them through that discussion and conversation. And if you need to make an ultimate decision, a decision that would lead them to believe that you're a dictator, but that to be for their good, then that is your role, your God-given role as a parent. And you mentioned earlier, Hunter, too, that so much of parenting is hoping that the small habits that you're instilling now and the patterns that you're creating now will pay dividends in the future, or will set your child onto a good trajectory in the future. And so seemingly small decisions, even though I also am not saying to put too much importance on each of those day-to-day decisions, but instilling good habits, making the difficult decision that is a little costly in the moment that will ultimately be good for your child is always worthwhile.
Well, I think this is a great case study in parenting, these youth sports, and so thanks for giving me a chance to exercise my vast parenting wisdom.
and all of your athletic prowess that thrust you into the world of youth sports and baseball.
That's right. As our listener clearly acknowledged, it would be great for us to tackle this when I'm back.
And we did. We did. I don't know that we conquered it, but we discussed it.
Yes.
To our listener who sent in this question, thank you. To all of you who listen to the podcast, track along, we love hearing from you. So if you have a question or a suggestion about something you'd like to hear us discuss on the podcast in the future, you can send all of that anytime to podcast@fellowshipdenver.org. Thanks for joining us on the Vision for Life podcast. Special thanks to Adam Englund for our theme music, to Jesse Cowan, our producer, and to Judd Connell, who provides transcription for these episodes.